Hi, this is Ben Philippe, author of Charming As A Verb, and you're listening to So Booking Cool. Take it away, Joel.
So booking, so booking, so booking cool.
There's so much booking cool to listen to So Booking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Jewel B. Today's guest is an award-winning author, professor, screenwriter, and writer whose work has appeared in various publications like Vanity Fair, BuzzFeed, Observer, and Bookanista, just to name a few. In 2013, he won the Tennessee Williams Fiction Contest, judged by novelist and screenwriter Michael Cunningham. His book, The Field Guide to the North American Teenager, won the 2020 William C. Morris YA Debut Award. The novel and its author continue to garner critical acclaim. Washington Post book critic Ron Charles says, "It's no longer tenable to imagine that the anxieties of a white heterosexual young man expelled from an expensive prep school capture the spirit of our era." Author E.B. Zeboy says of Norris, "By far the funniest, wittiest, smartest character I've ever read. Norris would be the perfect teen host for The Daily Show." And School Library Journal says that fans of John Green and Jason Reynolds will love the book. Now, readers are introduced to high school senior Henri in Charming As A Verb. Kirkus Reviews says, "This humorous first-person narrative with a conversational, almost conspiratorial tone will captivate readers." And from ALA Book List, from its dynamic, easy-to-love characters to the endearing prose, this novel easily embodies Henri's cultivated suaveness, and his unusually confident persona bring a fresh perspective. And New York Times bestselling author David Yoon says, "Packed solid with freestyle wit, real bestie charm, and the everyday diverse glory of New York City." Back with us today is author Ben Philippe. Stay tuned for our conversation only on So Booking Cool.
Hi, Joel.
Hi, Ben. Hi. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. That was an insanely flattering intro. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. I mean, look at who I'm talking to. Look at what has happened since the first time that we've talked, and speaking of what has been happening since we've last talked, how have you been holding up during these times, Ben? The pandemic, the quarantine, social unrest, all of it.
I'm doing really well, which feels kind of weird to say, but my family's healthy. I still have a job, and I like being indoors. I listen to a lot of podcasts all day, and like the first 20 minutes of every podcast is almost like the exact same thing. People just struggling, and rightfully so, but I don't have anything to complain about.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Are there any discoveries that you feel like you've made about yourself lately?
Maybe that I'm more of an outdoors and fitness person than I would have expected because, all the gyms closed and I'm in New York City, so there's not a lot of scenic running happening, especially with face masks. And I didn't think I would miss that because I was always the person that has to put the gym in my schedule and force myself to go there and just sort of groan the entire time. But I've been really antsy not being able to sort of take up physical exercise. So I've been doing it indoors, which is very strange. But yeah, that's a new self-discovery. I need to move. I need exercise. That's very strange. That's very new and strange.
And you mentioned that you have been listening to different podcasts. Have you also been watching anything lately that has interested you? Because I also remember the first time we did talk about television. I know that you cover television as well.
Oh yeah, that's one thing that has stayed constant because my love of TV is never ending. I can't even say that I watch more TV than before. I still watch the exact same amount of TV. I feel like maybe more reality TV than before. because television scripted TV is excellent. You love an Ozark, you love a Succession, you love something dense and fun, and really intellectual. But I also, not gonna lie, I've been getting lost in like the Real Housewives of Potomac and Selling Sunset. I don't know, something about like that easy sort of like mind-numbing reality TV really sort of like soothes in these trying times.
Do you think you would ever write about a character, like a protagonist, who at all is involved in reality TV?
I think so. I don't know if I have a plan to do so at the moment, but I always think like there was a show on Lifetime and then Hulu called Unreal, which was sort of about like the dynamics behind a TV show that was like The Bachelor. It was about one of the producers and, the amount of mind games you have to play on contestants to make them cry on camera and keep the story going. The first season was really, really good and engrossing. So yeah, I think reality TV has sort of like created an interesting landscape for people who are very self-aware of their like own personalities. Like people go on those shows being like, ooh, I'm going to be the sassy one, or I'm going to be the villain. It's sort of just another way of exploring the lies people tell themselves about themselves. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I also just got to ask, when you are covering TV, what are you looking for?
Mostly to have something to say. Like, it's no longer my sort of like steady source of income. So now I'm in a lucky position that I don't have to come up with a hot take on last night's episode of Riverdale. It's just like if I watch a TV show and something about it really like sparks my interest and I want to write about, usually I'll write the piece like on spec and then I'll email a bunch of TV editors I know to say, hey, would you be interested in this? And sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. It happens like more and more rarely. I think the last time was over a year ago at the ending of Game of Thrones, and I just had a lot of feelings about that last season, so I just like wrote a think piece. Recently, actually, like there was the show Dave with Lil Dicky on Hulu, which I love. I love that show so much. It makes me very, very happy. So I wrote a piece about that might come out in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. And, how do you feel about awards? And can you tell us about where you were when you found out that you won the William C. Morris Award? I know you attended and everything, but yeah, take us through that moment.
Sure. I was at what was that? Oh, I know where I was, because they were having a dinner for all the finalists, like the 5 of us. And I think I was there with my editor, Alessandra Balzer Bray. And we were just like talking to the committee, and I was lingering there because the hotel was nearby. And I think I was the last one there. And I remember they sort of all started to like encircle me and Alessandra, and realized I was the last one there. And normally what they do is that they wait until they have the dinner and everybody goes back to the hotel, and then they call the winner and to tell them, hey, tomorrow we're going to announce you as a winner. But since I was the last one there, they're just like, hey, we'll just tell you now. Congratulations, you won. And Alessandra was there. It was really emotional, and she was crying. And then I started to like tear up just a little bit because it was really like overwhelming. I also didn't think I had won, because I think in preparing like authors not to be too disappointed, like everyone in my life basically told me I wasn't going to win. They were like, your book is great. People really like your book, but normally like humor books don't win. Like books that lean on funny don't win. So just prepare yourself for that. Like it's already a crazy honor to be nominated. So I was really in that space that I did not see it coming at all. And then I had to like come up with a speech at 1 a.m. for the next day. But yeah, it was a great and very validating moment.
Do you remember what you said in your speech, or, what the gist of it was?
Oof. I think it was like 3 minutes of saying thank you in every variation possible. No, I just started to sort of, I think I wanted to thank librarians, because I think one thing I learned in this whole publishing a YA book thing is that like they're the gatekeepers that end up doing so much of the work, and they're all so passionate. They don't just pick like 7 pretty covers to like shove down kids' throats. Like they really read all the books. They select books that they feel are going to talk to their audiences. They select books that they feel are going to engage their kids. Like I come from my own experience with librarians is that libraries were just places with computers and books in the background. So I didn't have a computer at home, so I always just went to the school library to use a computer there. But like this new generation, I guess, of librarians are super involved and they're super thoughtful. So I just wanted to thank them because they had to read like dozens and dozens of books, all of them, and then discuss them and then sort of like select. And then when you really, I think they genuinely loved all the books nominated and they had to like discuss selecting the winner. I'm not quite sure how they did that, but it's a lot of time and effort and energy to ask of people who already have day jobs that don't pay nearly enough. Educators are underpaid. So I just wanted to like take a moment to thank them. So I think that was what the speech amounted to, with a lot of like blubber.
Wow, that's very nice. And yeah, shout out to the libraries. That was very awesome of you, Ben. When I was reading, some of the reviews for Charming as a Verb, a librarian, her only thing was that she feels like the book is more college oriented. So she's like, oh man, I feel like the middle grade audience is not really going to get it. But I just want to say that, especially when I was around that age, that's not going to stop the middle grade and the junior high school audience and even, a bit younger. That's not going to stop them from reading a YA novel at all. Like I'm telling you.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to sort of put myself, it's a very valid concern because I feel like if you're in the 7th grade, maybe you're not thinking about college already. And Charming as a Verb is set in the mind of a character who has already submitted all his college applications. So now he's living in that anxiety of waiting senior year to know what his life is going to end up being. And I remember, like, I was thinking about this the other day. I don't think I've ever wanted anything as badly as to get into my dream college. Like, I refresh that portal every single hour. Like, sometimes I would spend an hour refreshing it because who knows, maybe 2:43 p.m. is when, like, all the answers are going to come through. So I really wanted to tap into that anxiety because I think it's a very powerful emotion for kids these days. And yeah, hopefully the book manages to do that in a way that doesn't shut the door to people who aren't living with that stress.
And before we get into how the idea of Charming as a Verb came to be, and also I want to also know if this was an idea that you had before the Field Guide to the North American Teenager. I just want to say, going back to what I said about the reviews, a lot of people have been describing Charming as a Verb as, I'm hearing a lot of funny, relatable, realistic, romantically cute, resonant messages. So with these different types of praises, Ben, which one means the most to you and why?
Yeah, it's such a hard question. It's gonna sound very, very trite and superficial, but I always think that funny is the biggest praise I can get because it feels, I don't know, like it's the hardest bar to clear. Like when a book makes me laugh, when an author makes me laugh, I'm always like, ooh, you're going on a special shelf. So for people to see the book as like charming, heyo, but also like just funny is always really, really flattering, especially since it's very easy for to set up a joke that falls flat. And I think it's as easy to set up like 300 pages of zingers and funny moments that also could easily fall flat. So I'm very grateful that it hasn't so far.
Yeah. There's nothing like a book that makes you laugh out loud, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I remember as like for Field Guide, I love E.B. E.B.'s a boy. She wrote the blurb for it. She's literally one of my favorite people on earth. But I was like, after seeing the blurb that she wrote, I was like, I don't know if the book lives up to that. I think that's a lot of pressure to put on like on a first-time author because I think it was like the by far the wittiest character should host like the Daily Show. I'm like, E.B. Mm-hmm. E.B., you're really screwing me over with this one because people are going to take that and then they're going to be 20 pages into it and roll their eyes.
No, like it is a very, very funny character. Like, Norris leaps off the page and so does Henri.
Thanks.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So how did this story come to be and what is the heart and soul of Charming as a Verb?
I signed this is going to start with some administrative stuff, I guess, but I signed a 2-book contract when I sold the Field Guide to the North American Teenager, and I know people don't really want to hear that stuff because it's the boring stuff. But that essentially meant that after I was done with Norris's story, I had to start thinking of the second one. And I had a really, really, really big fear of writing a second character that sounded exactly like the first one. I really didn't want Henri and Norris to be interchangeable. So I think that was my biggest concern in coming up with the story. Like, the concerns were always in my head. It started around like the time of the, college admission scandal. That's the thing that was like all over the news. And to me, it was a little wild. I mean, I get the entire thing, but to me, the wildness of the privilege of parents, of millionaires, sort of like having to game the system to get their kids into schools. Whereas when I was that age, there's nothing I wanted more than to get into that school. And the kids I tend to meet when I'm doing panels or visiting schools, they're, often minorities and children of immigrants, and there's nothing they want more in those colleges. So the college admission scandal was like giving primacy to the want of the parents. Like, ooh, those parents are forcing those schools on those kids who don't, give a crap. And, that seems to be entirely true. But I wanted to tell a story of a kid that really wanted all those things. And I was living in that sort of yearning. And I wanted him to be different from Norris Kaplan. So everyone, not accused, but sort of like everyone assumed that Norris Kaplan is a version of me, which I guess he is. Like, looking back a year and a half later, yeah, maybe Norris is kind of similar to Ben Philippe at age 16. But Norris is sort of like a loner and sarcastic and pushes people away. So I wanted to write the opposite of that. So I decided to make Henri popular, very tall, very, very good looking, and very charming. So that was sort of like the genesis of coming up with that character. And I also knew it was going to be a romance because I felt like writing a rom-com. If Field Guide to the North American Teenager was kind of a coming of age, I wanted this one to sort of start as a rom-com. And I knew that the love interest was also going to be Black because in Field Guide, and you can see for the second book, I was always like trying to not be in conversation with the first book, which ended up putting me in conversation with the first book. But for Charming, I wanted for the love interest to also be Black. So that is the long roundabout way of how I came up with Henri and Corinne.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and Corinne, by the way, she is a fan favorite. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because she has, not to say that like love interests don't have personalities typically, but I think it's because she has, I think a lot about the term Black girl magic. And I know I'm a cis male, so that's like not my lane necessarily, but I think a lot about how like we assume that Black women are just effortlessly on top of stuff, right? Even with the election, it's Black women are going to save us all. Like, Black women have their own stuff to go through. Black women have to wake up every single day and experience the intersection of sexism and racism in this world. So I think they tend to be very blunt and very tough and full of love and joy and happiness and all that stuff. But for Corinne, I wanted to sort of like lean into those traits. So she's the loud, I think we all went to high school with that girl, the one who always has her hand up, even though she knows that everyone in the back of the room is going to roll their eyes at her for giving the correct answer. Corinne is still going to give the correct answer. Corinne was raised by a single mom. She speaks her mind, and she's not popular, but she's not like bullied. She's just a girl that like people stay away from because she's a little too intense. And yeah, I think that's a fun type of character. I say as someone who was a huge fan of Paris Geller in the Gilmore Girls, like that type of character who's just super intense, but that's also a way of keeping the world at bay. So even though I said that this is a rom-com, so you kind of know that Henri and Corinne are going to become like a thing. The story starts with her blackmailing him into sort of hanging out with her, sort of. So I think there was just, I don't know why people respond to her, but I can say why I enjoyed writing her, because she was strong and fun and unpredictable. And she didn't take crap from people, but you could tell that she was really sort of like, I could tell at least, that she was really vulnerable and afraid of getting hurt. So that was the appeal of Corinne for me.
And it was important to you, as you mentioned, to have Henri's love interest in the story be Black. Why is that? Is it for some of the reasons that you mentioned with some of the burden and the stereotypes of what Black women endure?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with that. And also, it's weird. The more books you write, and it's still weird for me to say books plural, the more people sort of assume that your entire belief system, politics, and like understanding of the world is channeled through those books. And in the first book, in The Field Guide to the North American Teenager, the two love interests, because there's a kind of a love triangle at play, are one of them is white and the other one is Indian American, mostly because they were based on people I knew. And the book was sort of like very thinly veiled autobiography that was like reshuffled geographically. But yeah, they were love interests that were based on people I knew. And I think sometimes Black on Black romances are given, like, not now. Now it feels like that's changing. I'm seeing those covers more and more. But sometimes those romances are given priority. Like, it's always, you know, handsome white guy with cute Black girl. The reverse was popular for a while, but then it fell by the wayside, like the Black guy, white girl. But it's, I don't know, something about seeing like two dark-skinned Black people on the cover experiencing a full blown and layered romance just felt important to me. I didn't want all my books out there to be interracial romances. So yeah, that was one of those weird sort of bullet points that popped up in my head when I started to outline it.
And the cover is beautiful.
Isn't it? I mean, my God,
Yes.
Steffi, she's a genius. She also drew the cover for the paperback of The Field Guide to the North American Teenager, Steffi Walthall. I think that's how you pronounce it. Walthall. Yes. And she's just phenomenal. Like the way she captured the two characters just like taking a stroll through New York City. I saw the first like mock-up of it. I was like, yes, thank you. I love it.
Yes, fabulous. You know, you mentioned that you wanted to make sure that Henri did not resemble Norris in any way. Do you think that Henri and Norris would get along? How do you think that would go?
I always map those things out in my head. I think, because now it's a three-way relationship between Henri, Norris, and Ben, to speak of myself in the third person, so obnoxious. I don't think Ben and Norris would get along. I generally don't. For a while when I was like writing that first book to try to get the voice right, I was writing like back and forth interviews with Norris, and we just didn't get along. It's weird to say because he doesn't exist, and I wrote everything about him, but we're very similar, but we would not get along. I think Henri and I would get along because we're good at keeping things superficial. Like Henri is very popular around his school because he's friendly to everyone and he has a good memory with names and inside jokes, but people don't really know him. Like his big secret is that his family is extremely poor. His dad is a janitor. He's only at that school because he won like an academic lottery. So he keeps everyone at bay. Even his best friend has never been to his building. Like inside the building, they just assume he lives in an Upper West Side apartment building. They don't know what his inner life looks like. He doesn't keep any social media because he doesn't want those rich kids to judge him. So he's very good at keeping things superficial. I think I'm very good at keeping things superficial. So to circle back to Norris and Henri, Norris would think Henri is such a freaking fake around the school, giving fist bumps to people, smiling. He would hate him and sort of like have a lot of snarky things to say. And Henri would be nervous that Norris can see right through him. So he would sort of like wave and smile, but keep his distance. Wow, I sound like an insane person just now. I realized.
No, that was, you were on top of that.
Just voices in your head, Ben. Those are all just voices in your head.
And speaking of the book, I saw on your IG stories that you had an A-side in regards to Charming As A Verb. Is that a playlist? Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, for this one, someone asked me for like the promotional. I think it was for Whitbox. They're like, "Oh, by the way, if you have a playlist in mind for the book, feel free to share it with us." And it stayed in my head for so long, and I was like, working way too hard to assemble the perfect 12-song playlist, 6 that would belong to Henri and 6 that would belong to Corinne. So yeah, that was a little preview of that. I think I only put up 5 or 6 on there because I was like, this is so obnoxious. Because when people put IG stories that have 15 bars, I just hate them. I just mute them right away. So I just put a little sample. But I think I love New York City. Austin, maybe The Field Guide to the North American Teenager was kind of a hate letter to my time in Austin. And Austin's a very cool town, but I just don't do well in the heat. And I love snow and seasons. So you can see why Texas wouldn't jam with me, while New York City does, very much so. And one of the things I love most about New York City was riding the subway with headphones on. I just like watching people and listening to music and podcasts. So I would always, unless I was running late to class or something, I would always take the local, try to find a seat, have a book, that I would read 4 pages of because I'm really just listening to people and watching people. But yeah, for some reason for this book, the playlist felt important. Imagining the songs that Henri's listening to, that Corinne is listening to on a commute to school every day was something I spent a lot of time thinking about.
Are you going to show that playlist again for people who might have missed it, or they want to see it again so they can know for sure what those songs are?
Yeah, I think I'm going to save it as one of those I'm so old moments. Those circle thingies on your profile. Highlights.
There we go. Okay, cool.
I'm so old. Jeez.
Yeah, right. Not old.
Circle thingies.
What are ways, with you no longer being a first-time published author, under your name and everything, what are some ways that you continue to perfect your craft?
Oh, boy. I don't know about perfecting. I think it's still it's weird. I've written 2 books now, and whenever I get those craft questions, I'm still sort of flailing a little bit. I still think of stories I want to tell, that weird glimpse into my head where I had Henri and Norris in conversation with each other. I think about my future characters a lot in that sense. So right now I'm planning a 3rd book, and unlike the second one, which was part of a 2-book contract, this one is just for me. So no one has seen it yet. I don't have a deadline for it. Right now I'm just living with the characters. And I think finding the right voices for the characters is really, really important to me, or my process, or what have you. Because there's actually a version of Charming As A Verb that was fully written. That was just bad. It was not exactly the same premise, but you could probably use the same cover. It was Henri and Corinne. They lived in the same building. Henri was a dog walker also. So I wrote a full book that was 75,000 words, and it was just bad. I sent it to the editor and the publishers, and I didn't hear anything back for 10 days. And then they're like, hey, could we just have a chat just to check in? Sure. And then we checked in, and then they were like, yeah, this could use a lot of work, some stuff. And I was like, you think it's bad, right? And they're like, yeah, we do. And I was like, oh, thank God. So I was able to start over. I knew it was bad because I didn't feel sad about having to start over in a blank document. And it felt like relief to be able to do so. And I think that's because I got the voices wrong in my head. I didn't spend enough time thinking through the characters the first time. So being able to do that now, just think about that next 3rd story that I'm hoping will be a murder mystery, also set in New York, is really fun. To be able to do that untethered without having to loop anyone in yet is, I guess, my definition of craft, just thinking.
Right. Oh, wow. So yeah, you have this 3rd book. So is this going to be with a different publisher?
No idea.
Okay.
I hope it's with the same one, because literally no one has heard anything about it. It's just sort of my emails to myself, a couple of doodles of characters, what they could, and just ideas. I'm hoping it's with the same publisher because I love Alessandra. She's been my editor for both Field Guide and Charming As A Verb. I love her. I love Balzer Bray. So fingers crossed that it's with them, but the book is at least 2 years away from being a thing.
So what do you look for in a publisher? Like, what would you say to other authors out there, like what they should look for in a good publisher? And, what was it like doing your second book with the great Alessandra Balzer and everything?
I think you have to look, even in both publishers and agents and all that sort of like industry stuff, you have to look for people whose emails you aren't afraid of. It's a weird thing for me, but like Alessandra can email me, and whether or not it has an attachment, whether or not it's just like a blurb she's forwarding me, or it's a manuscript that has like so many notes I have to go through, I'm never afraid of her emails. I'm never like, oh God, I can't open this now. And I have friends who are also writers. They have that fear of their own sort of editors and publishers. Like, they're like, I made too many typos. They're going to think less of me. The book didn't sell as well as expected. They're disappointed in me. And they really have that fear. And I very much understand that fear, because I think maybe I had it with my first couple of agents 4 or 5 years ago. And I don't think that feeling is productive. So now I actively sort of like lean away from it. I look for people whose emails don't scare me, which is like very trite, but it's a very, like, I think we all know what that feeling is.
Yes.
When you get an email from someone and just a name and like the highlighted line in your inbox kind of fills you with dread. And I try to find people and work with people when I have a say in the matter that don't create that feeling.
And you mentioned, your other writer friends. Ben, is being a part of an author community important to you, and is it important for other authors?
Yes, with a question mark. I don't know how good I am at being at a crowded table, and this all goes back to high school, really. I like having a couple of people that I'm really sort of like close with, or that I can just DM or text when I think something's funny or think something is like eye roll inducing. But like being part of the active YA community, I think it's something that I just don't necessarily have in me. And that's not to say that the people who do it are disingenuous, because I think it's so cool that there are authors that loop people into their process, that sort of have like Q&As on Twitter and just really engage in the discourse. And you hear the scandal, what do you think of American Dirt? Like really, really involved in everything happening in publishing. Mm-hmm. And all of that kind of scares me just a little bit. I'm like, I will stay here tweeting snarky things and posting about the Gilmore Girls and baking a cake from scratch and putting it on Instagram. That is my lane. And maybe I'd have 10,000 more followers if I was really engaged with the community, but it's a little overwhelming from the outside. So I think it's important to have people you trust. And every single YA author I've met has been delightful. Like I went on tour with a bunch of them for the release of Field Guide, and I've been to conferences with them. They're all so cool, and I'm always so happy when they're doing amazing stuff. Jeff Zettner, that cool rocker who is like also a lawyer, was also like always doing thoughtful stuff on Instagram and teaching. They're EB, like I'm not gonna try to list all the names because I generally love all these people. I'm just not at a table, and I'm not sure I want to be.
Okay. Yeah. Would you ever write a series, a middle grade novel, or an adult book?
Yes. I've actually written my third book that is going to be published. I just finished it. It's coming out spring 2021. And that one isn't YA. It's adult nonfiction. It's a collection of essays.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I needed to do that. Like I love YA. I love playing with these characters, but like I wanted to write something that didn't have that layer of removal, that like I didn't have to sort of channel my thoughts into the voice of Henri or the voice of Corinne or the voice of, Norris Kaplan. I could just like, for better or worse, we'll see, use the voice of Ben. So that one, I was going to say excited, but truly terrified to see what people are going to think. But that one's going to come out with Harper Perennial in spring 2021.
Yes, that is so exciting. I remember hearing about that deal, with, I want to get the name right, Amber Oliver, I believe.
Yeah, Amber is freaking queen. Yes, that's the one.
That is so exciting. And you know, Ben, there are already people who are so tuned in to what you are writing, which is why Charming as a Verb has been, anticipated and everything. I want to go back to something that I said earlier when we talked about, you being award winning and everything. And, you having people initially tell you that this is not going to happen. Humor books don't typically win and whatnot. So I just want to know, as an author, are these some of the things that authors can expect? And just how do you manage your expectations?
How do I manage my expectations? I think I always expect the worst outcome. That's just who I am as a person. New relationship, let's see if we break up in 4 months. That's just how I think about everything. So that makes managing expectations really easy. In the case of like the Morris Award, again, it's like, it feels so cheesy. Like I'm quoting bad Oscars from the 90s, but like just being nominated was already like such a big deal that I really wasn't thinking about like who was going to be the winner. It was just like, oh no, we've selected this handful of writers to just praise, and you're one of them. And that was so awesome. Alessandra was so pumped. Like I remember she called me, and it was like a conference call in the middle of the day, and she knows I don't like to talk on the phone. She just knows that like there are some people who are like, oh, let's make a quick 30-second phone call. I'm not one of those people. And she was like, no, we have to talk on the phone. We have to talk on the phone. And then she told me I was one of the finalists. And I think she was looking for a bigger reaction. But the truth is that I really didn't know much about the award itself. I was like, oh, cool, that's nice. It was like, no, I need a little more than that because this is a huge deal. So I was really living in the field. And then I looked up the past winners and what the award entailed and who selected it. And I was like, oh, holy crap, this is a huge deal. But I was able to live in the feeling of being a finalist to mitigate my my expectations. And also it still feels like it's not imposter syndrome because I'm also a teacher and I see students have imposter syndrome. And I'm like, this is not going to serve you. And I try to shake them out of it. And I think by doing that, I've shaken myself out of it. But I'm also always just a little overwhelmed by everything happening in the publication, on the publication side of things. Just because like, I very much remember when my writing career was just like the submittable portal, which like with a column of rejected short stories. So all of this still feels a little unreal, and I'm not jaded yet. I guess. Does that make sense as an answer?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And speaking of what you tell people, I have to bring up a tweet that you published. This is also, it's to all minority writers. You said, go through life with the young white male confidence of the student who got a B- in my intro to screenwriting class 4 years ago and offered to make me his writing partner to handle that structure stuff.
That's a recent one. I think that was like this weekend. Yeah, I did tweet that, didn't I?
You did, yeah. So tell us why this is a message that you wanted to get out.
It goes back to that imposter syndrome thing. And I don't like to tweet about my students. I teach at a liberal arts college in New York City. So a lot of my students are very wealthy or children of wealthy families, and they're very sort of like well-read, well-educated. And I really love all of them. I wouldn't still be teaching if I didn't enjoy it. But also occasionally you bump up against, a little bit of privilege. Especially when they're like the wealthy white male kind. And that was just a funny memory I had because when that day happened, I was just looking at my inbox and I was just a little speechless because I mailed a student his grade. I also teach at a women's college, but I also have like male students from Columbia who can take the class. And the male students are always the ones who think they're the next Nolan. Whereas like you'll have women, young women, women of color especially, they'll submit a perfect assignment right on time, and their email to you will come with an apology. Like, hey, here are my pages for the week. I'm sorry, it must suck. Looking forward to class. And I'm like, why are you apologizing for doing everything right? Whereas like the again, some of them, not all of them, a lot of them I love. And even this student, I really enjoyed. He was a fun kid to be around. But the white male confidence of coming in with that, like, yeah, I'm basically the next Christopher Nolan, just like biding my time. They have that. And I think it's such a superpower. I really do. No snark, not sort of throwing shade. I think being able to go through life as your number one cheerleader, thinking you're awesome, and any criticism is just, background noise. I think that's a superpower, as opposed to inventing and cluttering your mind with criticism that hasn't happened yet. So I would, if I can't dissipate that confidence / entitlement, I wish more writers of color had it.
And Charming as a Verb, what do you want people to take away from your new book and any book that you write and have already written?
I don't know. A few laughs. It's weird. I'm in my own head, as you can tell from this interview. I'm in my head a lot, and I'm always trying to balance the fact that on the one hand, whatever I write is going to be considered representative of, especially with the year we've been having in 2020, Bookstagram and the books by Black authors popping up. I'm going to be occasionally placed on some very lofty lists. So I'm always sort of like aware of that higher social lens. Like, I didn't want to be a YA author whose only romances were interracial. I wanted a Black romance in there. So that's like me, I guess, writing for the audience or in awareness of the audience. But ultimately, I just want people to have a good time reading my books. Like, it is so easy to be bored by a book. There are so many boring books out there. So if somebody can finish one of my books and be like, no, that was a good time. That was like a 3 out of 5 or 6 on Goodreads. I'm like, yeah, I've done my job. I've entertained you. Thanks for reading. So I think I try to keep the bar that low. I think if I was too concerned, feels like I'm putting myself above it. But if I was too concerned with how the book is going to be received, the conversation it's going to engender, I would just not be able to write. It would be like paralyzing.
Ben Philippe, everyone. Ben, thank you so much for talking to So Booking Cool again. It's always awesome to chat with you. And let everyone know how they can get Charming as a Verb, which will be releasing September 8th, and how they can, of course, continue to stay updated and stay connected with you.
Thanks, Jewel. I almost interrupted you there, but I was like, no, I'm going to stop. I'm going to wait for her to finish. It's always so fun to talk to you. This feels wild. Like I told you before we started, like this was the first interview I ever did almost 2 years ago. You interviewed Alessandra and like we talked, and it's wild, but feels totally right to have another chat like with Charming about to come. So yeah, thank you for making the time for me. I so appreciate it. Charming as a Verb comes out September 8th. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, all the big ones, but also like the world's been really, really weird, really, really exhausting, really, really unpredictable lately. So I would say that if there is a bookstore that you truly like, even if you're just like passing in front of it occasionally, please try to buy it from there, because they're the ones that might actually just not survive, right? They're the ones that are just like, oh, we're losing profits this quarter. They're the ones that are just going to be like, no, we've been in business for 25 years and that's a wrap. Thank you, 2020. So if you can, even though those books can be a little more expensive, they can take a while to get there if you order. Support your local bookstores is what I would ask. And yeah, thank you for reading me.
That's awesome. That is so true. Very, very good words. No surprise there, Ben. And I'm going to throw in a bonus question because, just to go back to the first time we talked, and guys, if you haven't checked out the first time we talked about the Field Guide of the North American Teenager, check that out. That was also a great chat. But yeah, Ben, who could you see portraying the awesome, charming Henri? Because do you remember when we did this with Norris?
Oh, I remember. I very much remember that talk because I listened to the interview after. I was like, boy, I talk a lot about I'm like a freaking casting executive. What the heck, man?
That's great.
Who could play Henri? This one I have an answer for. I have a very, very clear picture in my head. Because Henri is cartoonishly good looking. Like, one of my pet peeves is that teenagers in movies and TV shows about high school are always super attractive, and you only have like someone say, "Oh, he's so dreamy," or something like that. No. These people are like the top 3% of human attractiveness, and people just are casually like, "Oh, because they're wearing a hoodie and holding some books, like you're just supposed to go along with it." So I would want someone really cool and tall and attractive to play Henri. And I was watching one of my favorite shows of the past 2 years, Sex Education on Netflix. And one of those characters, I think the actor's name is Kendar Williams Sterling. Like, he's the popular jock or swimmer, Jackson. He feels like a Henri with a British accent, I guess. But he always had that cool swagger that I felt like, oh yeah, that's a Henri vibe.
Okay, so you said the character's name is, or the actor's name is, because I just pulled up the cast. So.
The actor's name is Kendar Williams Sterling.
Oh, yes, there we go.
And the character's name is Jack.
Yes, I could totally see that.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Super black, super cool. He has that like cool guy energy. Like, yeah, you get to be Henri.
Yeah, I like that you get to be Henri. Yes, Ben. Yes. Again, Ben Philippe, I look forward to chatting with you again, for the next projects that are going to be coming out. And again, congratulations on all that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you for, continuing to support and stuff. I appreciate it. So thank you to all the listeners. Until next time, so booking cool.